God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God.
Well, good morning, church. Well, so Tiffany's gone on the mission trip, right? And so Eli was with me all morning, and he was up here playing earlier this morning, and it was reported to me that there are some extra things back here. So I don't know where Eli found this, but this might be missing from somewhere. Apparently, somebody has a step stool. This belongs to somebody. Is this your? Who's it? This? It's not yours. I don't know where Eli found it. I don't know where he found it, but he found it somewhere. I told him to put everything up, but apparently, if I didn't specify what that thing was, he didn't do it. So, all right. Well, first of all, if you would like a note sheet, please raise your hand. Someone will bring you a sheet right now. So the Philippines mission trip is underway. They got safely to the Philippines about 1:50 this morning. And so they're there, they're good. They've got to Tiffany's cousin's house, and everything's going well. Those of us who were left back here, the parents and the spouses, we were following their planes on little apps where you can actually it's a live plane tracker. Did y'all know these things existed? A live plane tracker. I told Tiffany that it's like watching grass grow, because you're just looking at a screen with a little plane icon on it, and then every once in a while it moves, and you're going, I think it moved. Yeah, I think, and so we watched that. I watched it. I actually cast it on my TV, and so it was on my television while I was working on the sermon. But I watched it all night long until they actually landed. So they're there, safe and sound. But when Tiffany was in Dubai, I actually got to speak with her on the phone. And I told her something that I was wanting to do. She's been asking for a bathtub in our bathroom for a long time. And I thought, you know what? While she's gone, I'm going to take advantage of this. I'm going to put a bathtub in. So I actually found a brand new bathtub with one little ding in it for $40. That's pretty good, right? So I'm like, I can't not do it now. So I told her, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put this thing in. And she said something at this point that just shows the extreme gulf that exists between her mentality and mine right now. When I told her this, she said, before you take out the old shower, be sure you clean it. And I said, what? Clean the shower? She says, yes. Before you put that shower in the front yard, be sure you clean it. Now, I like to think of myself as a pretty compliant husband. Most of the time I am, but I in no way, shape, or form gave her any indication that I was going to do that. And I am not going to clean that shower before it goes out in the front yard or in the trash can, however I get it out of there. But I thought that's too good not to share. All right, so seriously. Let's take a turn on the serious side. So recently, I've been finding myself a lot thinking about something. This thought, I've had these thoughts over the years, but in the last few months, I've been having them a lot. And it's just been coming to my mind a lot. And it's this thought that God truly has delivered me, and He saved me from so many stupid decisions. Bible hours in here today. I shouldn't have said that. So many not smart decisions. I should not. Along the way that I think about, had I been able to go through with that, or had I walked down that path just a little further, I probably never would have come back from that. Or had I done that, what destruction would have followed from there? Does anybody else know that sense? You can look at, I can think of very specific moments in my life. I'm talking about specific moments right here, right now, in this decision. And had this decision been made, my life would have been completely different. And sometimes, not just different, but completely worse and destroyed. And I've just been thinking about that a lot recently, and just thinking, it's not because of any goodness of my own that I'm where I am. It truly is there, but for the grace of God go I. That's what I mean. I really look at these moments and think, in that moment, I was not smart enough to do it. I would have done it. I would have gone down that path, But God rescued me. It really is all His mercy. I found myself just being enthralled and thrilled and thankful for the fact that He truly has delivered me. That might kind of tie in with the sermon today, but I'm not sure. But I wanted to share it anyway. It's been on my heart. Let me start the sermon like this. So I've told y'all before about this this wildfire, this forest fire that happened in Colorado when Tiffany and I lived up there. Y'all remember? I've mentioned that before. And so it was just destructive. I mean, over 70,000 acres of land, of forest, burned. And it was very destructive fire. Now, what happens often after forest fires, it's a neat way that God has made nature, but it's interesting how it happens. But you need the rain before the fires, but what happens often is the rain just comes after the fires and deluges. And what happened after this particular fire, because all of the vegetation was gone, it had been burned, when the rain fell, those little valleys, those gullies just filled to overflowing with water, and they overflow their banks, and they cause a lot of destruction and damage as the water is running down to the rivers. So this happens after forest fires all the time. Now, this one particular time, after the fire, a few days after this rain had come, I went to this one house doing my job. And my job back then, for those of y'all that don't remember, I would find buried electrical lines so that people could dig. And so I get to this one guy's house, and he's trying to do some work, and he's telling me about what happened when the flood came down the mountain. And he said he's sitting there at night, when the rain came was at night, and he's in his house. And the water rises up, had never done this before, but it rose up above the banks of the little gully that he had his house on. It was literally a gully, not a flowing creek, not all the time, it was just a gully. But now the water rose up over the banks of that gully. And it got to where he couldn't even get out of his house. It had encompassed his house. And he said all night long, he heard sticks, rocks hitting up against the side of his house. Boom, boom, boom. Can you imagine what it would be like to be in a house like that all night long? What are you thinking? What are you thinking when you're there? I hope the foundation is secure. And I hope the house is tied securely to the foundation. Right? That's what you're thinking. And thankfully, that guy's house was secure. It withstood that beating all night long. And then he was doing some work the next day to try to avert that from happening again. But it was an incredible thing to see. And I think about that's what our lives are like. We all have these times in our lives where we have to weather some sort of storm. And at that time, when we are weathering that storm, what are we asking ourselves? What is the foundation of my life? And am I firmly, securely tied to that foundation? Am I going to last through this? Am I going to be okay on the other side of this? Am I going to get through this? To me, it makes me think of two big ideas that have been big ideas in my life, my entire life, or at least for a long time in my life. One is, can I weather the storms that come? And two is, am I the real deal? Am I a real firm, secure house? Am I the real deal, or am I just going to the first sign of trouble? Am I going to collapse and be washed downstream? Am I the real deal, and can I weather the storm? I imagine that a lot of you feel those same questions. I imagine a lot of you feel those same things, and I think that all of us do want to know. We want to know that no matter what happens to us today, we want to know that no matter what happens to us, what kind of call we get from the doctor, what kind of news we get from our boss, what kind of word we get from our spouse, what kind of what kind of word we get from our children, what they have to say to us about where they're going with their lives. We want to know that on the other side of that, we're going to be okay. We want to know that on the other side of that, we're going to get through that, and we're going to be okay when we get to the other side. Every one of us wants to know that. We want to know, there's a phrase in the book of Daniel, and it talks about being weighed and measured and found to be lacking. You know what I'm talking about? And we all want to know that when we go through these times in lives, when we are being weighed, when we are being measured, when our life is being sized up, we want to know that when that is done, we will not be found lacking. Is this true for everybody else in here? I can handle a few head nods right now. I know it's spring break, but I'm still working right now. So, but we all do want to know that. We all want to know that we're going to be okay and that we're the real deal. We're going to be okay. We're going to be able to last through this. We're going to be able to survive through this, and we're really the real deal. We're really Christians. We're really children of God. We're really men of God. We're really women of God. We're really whatever it is. We want to know that we're the real deal. We're going to be in, well, we're not in Christ alone. I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe that got put in twice. That song was long enough. We don't need to sing it again, honestly. Did I just say that? I think I did, but it's spring break, right? Okay, we're going to be in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be at the end of it. Now, here's how Jesus ends the Sermon on the Mount. Look in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. I want to read this to you. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. And Jesus says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." Now, as I was developing the sermon, I had initially planned to just do one sermon. And as I was writing it, I thought, I can't do all this in one sermon. And I bet you're going to be glad at the end of this. I don't know how long it's going to go, but it's going to be half of what it would have been earlier. And so I decided I'm going to do this over 2 weeks. So this week, I'm just going to do part of this. But we're going to have a 2-week series on this idea that we find here at the end of the book of. But what Jesus is telling us is, after you have heard everything I've just said, I want you to do something with this. That word "do" there is important. He said in the NIV, he says, put into practice what you have heard. But in the other versions, you see he uses the word "do," and that's important, I think, because it lines up with another "do" that we're going to look at later on. But he says, I want you to actually do something with this. It's important that you don't just hear it, that you don't just take it in and then you think about, wow, that's a great thing. It's important that you actually do something. You take it away and you actually do something with it. Now, I'm going to introduce today as an application something new that we're doing. Jeff mentioned this a few weeks ago. They're called life application groups. And so what we're going to do with these life application groups is actually try to do what Jesus is saying here. Because Jesus says at the end of his sermon, he says, don't just hear this, do something with it. So what we want to do, and I'll explain this a little more at the end of the sermon and give you a little more ideas, but what we want to do is we don't want to be people that just hear sermons, whether they're good or bad or whatever. We want to be people that hear them and do them. Am I right? I can get an amen on that one. I know I can. Because we do want to be that kind of people that hear it and we actually do it. We actually put it into practice. And so what these life application groups are going to be is groups where we get together and we simply talk about what was that lesson and what am I, and specifically what can I in my life do with that lesson. Now, I can't cover every application that the way it would affect every single person in here. When I give applications, I can give some ideas. This is how this could apply. But what you need to do, and that's what these groups want to do, is have some time to process that idea and walk away from that lesson going, this week, I'm going to try to do this. That's what these groups are about. Now, you're going to find that this idea actually goes back a long, long, long time. Has anybody ever heard of a guy named Pliny the Younger? Yeah, Pliny the Younger was a governor of Pontus and Bithynia. And listen, now Pliny was not a Christian. In fact, Pliny in this letter that we're going to read an excerpt from this letter. In this letter, Pliny is writing to an emperor, a non-Christian emperor named Trajan. And he's trying to find out, how do I deal with these Christians? And now here in this little section, he's just going to tell us, here's what the Christians are telling me about themselves. This is what they say they do. And listen to how similar it sounds to what we just said we're going to try to do in our groups. He says, they asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn. Now that's interesting. How many, can we do that before dawn? Alan, you think we get... before dawn and sing responsibly a hymn to Christ as to God, and to bind themselves by oath, not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not falsify their trust, nor to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and to assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary and innocent food. I'm not sure what ordinary and innocent food is, but apparently that's what they were eating. But what I find interesting is what they did. They would meet together, they would sing, later they would eat, but right in the middle of that, what did they do? They committed themselves to living a certain way. That was part of their worship. That was how they worshiped. They said, hey, this week, I'm not going to do that. We just talked about not committing fraud, so I'm not going to do that this week. I'm going to try not to do that anymore. And so that's what we're doing in these life application groups. The same type of idea. We want to commit ourselves, bind ourselves to obedience. All right. So next week, what we're going to do is talk about 2 reasons why we must do something with Jesus' teaching. What we're going to see what Jesus lays out some ideas here for the reasons why this is so important. And those 2 ideas have some sub-ideas, and so I just couldn't explore it all in 1 week. So we're going to look at that next week. But this week, we're going to ask another question first. What is this teaching that Jesus is actually telling us to do? And that's important. It's an important question for us to ask and to understand the answer that Jesus would give, because anybody can bring anything to this answer and think, well, that's what Jesus is telling us here. But Jesus had something very specific in mind, I believe, based upon the context. What he is telling us, this is what you must do. So look back in chapter 7, verse 12. Chapter 7, verse 12. This is a very famous passage right here. And we actually talked about this in our men's Bible class on Wednesday night. But it's a passage that almost feels like, if you're not careful, you almost think, what does this have to do with anything here? It's like Jesus just threw this in here. First of all, let me just say, when we're reading the Sermon on the Mount, we really need to believe that Jesus is a master teacher. And so any master teacher is probably not just going to be throwing out, here's one thing to think about, and there's another thing to think about, and why don't you think about that? And they're not tied together. That's not what master teachers do. Master teachers have a thought they're trying to get across, and everything ties together. And I want to tell you that the Sermon on the Mount is no different. And so everything that Jesus says, there's a flow of thought that he is getting across, and he ends up, well, I'll tell you that in a minute. So let's read this together, chapter 7, verse 12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So, Jesus begins and he says, so. And this word so actually signifies that it's the conclusion and a process of reasoning. That's what this word means. When you use this word so, it's the way we still use it now. When we say so, whatever it is, we're signifying that this is the conclusion of this whole rationale I've been giving you. So, do this. And so what that means is that this statement is Jesus' summary, is his summarizing statement of the Sermon on the Mount. Have you ever thought of it like that? Have you ever thought that do unto others as you would have them do unto you is a summarizing statement for the Sermon on the Mount? Most of the time we pull that out when we're telling our kids to share their cookies. Am I right? Am I right? I think that we have cheapened it. I honestly think that when we call it the golden rule, I think we have cheapened it. We've made it into this one supreme rule. It's the golden one, but it's a rule and something you should consider applying sometimes. And it's important to do. I think we cheapen it when we use that kind of language. This idea here, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is so extremely significant. It bears a significance that is beyond simply what the golden rule would indicate. It is not the golden rule. It is the substance of Jesus' entire teaching. You understand that? Listen to what he says. The next thing. He says, this is the law and the prophets. That's what the Greek literally says. It says, this is the law and the prophets. In the NIV, how does he say it here? He says, for this sums up the law and the prophets. In other versions, you'll see they'll translate it literally. What it says is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the law and the prophets. He says, that's it. That's what, if you want to know what the law and the prophets are about, this is it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so Jesus says, that's how significant this is. That's how significant this rule is. It's not just a golden rule to tell your kids to share their cookies. This is you should use it then. I mean, it's a good time then to use that, but it's more than that. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's more than that. This is the substance of Jesus' entire teaching. It's the substance of this entire sermon that he has built up to. This is his concluding statement. As he has taught this entire sermon, he says, this, so do this. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's everything. When Jesus says this is the law and the prophets, does that remind you? Do you recognize that from anywhere else? Sure you do. Of course you do. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 40, but let's read verses 37 through 40. So Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. So someone had said, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And so Jesus replies like this. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So when Jesus says, what are the law and the prophets about? They're about loving God and loving other people. You love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love other people. How? As yourself. What's that math term where if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C? Isn't there something like that? Commutative? Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry to cause an argument between our math teachers. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? So if doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you equals the law and the prophets, and the law and the prophets equals loving God and loving others, then doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you equals loving God and loving others. Does that make sense? So when Jesus says do unto others, what he is talking about there is love. What he's talking about is love. That's not hard to imagine. I mean, that makes sense if we think about it, right? There's another passage that does this even, does a little more of this. So in Romans chapter 13, verse 8, Paul says this. He says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. And so you connect these two ideas here. And actually, we're going to look at another passage where Jesus uses this same language himself. So this means that when you do unto others as you would have others do unto you, you are fulfilling the law. Does this remind you of anything Jesus said elsewhere? Look over in Matthew, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. This is very interesting how all this ties together, honestly. Look at this. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law of the prophets. He's talking about the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. And how does Paul tell us we fulfill them? By loving. And what does Jesus tell us is the essence of love? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You see? And this is, maybe you're all thinking, I was really excited about this. You might be thinking, well, of course, that makes sense, Deryk. But I'm excited about this because it brings this golden rule. It shows how significant this is. This truly is everything that Jesus was trying to get across in his teaching. This is not just some guideline. It is the foundation of everything. Look what he says in chapter 5, verse 20. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. See, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they were great at external religious duties that didn't get fully into the heart. Let me say that again. They were great at external religious duties that did not get fully into the heart. And Jesus says, your righteousness, if you're going to be a follower of mine, your righteousness must surpass that kind of righteousness. You must have a righteousness that is more than that's just about external religious duties. They were all about fasting. They were all about giving. They were all about praying. They were all about doing all those wonderful things, worshiping in the temple. But Jesus says, you've got to have more righteousness than that. And so he tells them, I've not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Your righteousness must be more than what they used to do. And then when he ends the entire sermon, he says, so this is the sum of the entire thing. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so that's how we fulfill the law. And that is how that's the kind of righteousness that surpasses that of the Pharisees. When we will love others and do unto them as we would have them do unto us. That's what it means. That's what it means. I want you to just briefly look. We're going to look through some of some of what Jesus says in this Sermon on the Mount. And you're going to see how this idea, it is the undergirding idea in everything he says here. How many of you want to be murdered? So, yeah, you don't murder other people, right? How many of you want other people to be angry with you? You like that? So you're not supposed to be angry with them, right? How many of you like it when other people call you names? So you're not supposed to call other people names. How many of you like it when people use in terms of derision to talk straight to your face? So you don't use terms of derision to talk to them. How many of you would like it if your spouse were thinking about someone else in their mind? So you don't think about someone else in your mind. How many of you would like your covenant to be broken? The covenant you've made with your spouse. How many of you would like that to just be cut off and broken and treated as nothing? No, so you don't do that either. How many of you would like to not know if you can ever believe someone else? You always wonder, are they telling the truth because they're swearing this and they're swearing that, but I don't know if they're telling the truth. How many of you like that? So you don't do that to other people. How many of you like it when your enemy persecutes you or does bad things to you? How many of you like that? Nobody likes that, right? So are we supposed to persecute our enemies? Or are we supposed to pray for them? Or are we supposed to bless them? If we would like them to do that for us, then that's what we do, right? And so on it goes. And even then when we come down to the religious duties, I think this is interesting. It's telling. Jesus talks about giving, praying, and fasting. And he says what was wrong with the way that the Pharisees and teachers of the law gave and prayed and fasted is that they did it so other people would see them, right? They did it so other people would see them and think something special about them. Now, let me ask you this. Let's say your house burns down in a fire or a tornado. No, let's say a tornado comes through and it tears down your house. And so you're out there one day and you're trying to clean it up, and some politician, not Rob, because Rob would never do this, right? But some politician comes up and he comes with his cameras and everything, and you see him pick up a few pieces of trash and he's smiling at the camera while he's putting the trash in a trash can. And then he walks over and he shakes your hand and he's smiling at the camera while he's shaking your hand. And then as soon as the camera's off, he's like, see ya, and takes off. How many of you would like to be treated like that? Nobody would. And so we don't use God for that either. We even do unto God like we would like other people to do unto us. And so this is the undergirding idea of everything that Jesus is telling us. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And so that's what we're going to try to understand how to do. We're going to try to understand how to apply this kind of idea to our life all the time. And so look, we're going to start concluding it now. So in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 again, Jesus says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Let me say it the way it says in the Greek. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And so we are supposed to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. That word do is important. What are we going to do with this lesson? What are we going to do with any lesson we ever hear? What are we going to do in any moment in which we ever find ourselves? we're going to do what we would want them to do to us. And if we do that, things are going to be good. We're going to be walking in the way that the Lord wants us to walk. We're going to be obeying His foundational ethic, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. So, we're going to start these life application groups. Let me read this with you. You could read it just as well as I can, but it'll be boring if I just let you read it without me reading. So I'm going to read out loud. These groups will have a twofold purpose. Provide an atmosphere where we can dream together about how to actually live out the message we heard on Sunday morning. That's the idea. The first and foremost thing that we want to accomplish is how can we actually do this, whatever that lesson was. And the second thing is deepen our relationships with each other toward the end of calling and inspiring each other to more vibrant expressions of faith and love. And so a lot of us don't have these kind of relationships with each other. And we need to have these deeper relationships with our brothers and sisters in Christ where we can be called and challenged and where we challenge our brothers and sisters as well. We need this in our church. Every church needs this. Every Christian needs this. We need to be able to say, how are we going to do this? And we need to help each other do that. And so that's what these groups are going to be about. Now we're going to start right now with 7 groups. And I'm going to ask the leaders of these groups if you would please stand up so everybody can see who these leaders are. So we have Rodney and Sonia Grass, Cliff and Sherry Willis, Tracy Waller, Jeff and Naomi Mathis, Eddie and Jeanette Johnson. Eddie is outside watching our doors. He is here today. Jeff and Sue Agee, and Sue's here. Jess in the Philippines, and Joel and Sabrina Porter, and there's Joel right here. So these are the groups. Okay, you can sit down, guys. Thank you very much. So these are the group leaders, and what I want to encourage you to do is at the end of this service, on the back, in the foyer back here, there's a table, and it has the sheets of paper with their names on it. And I just want to encourage you to go back there and put your name on one group. Please only take one group and write your name on one line. Don't write a couple's name on one line. Your name on one line. If you have a spouse, their name on another line. And we're going to try to make these groups where we can start doing this together, where we can start dreaming together and encouraging each other together. And so at the end of the service, let me encourage you to go do that. If those groups happen to fill up, which we have 12 spots in each group, that's including the leaders. And so if those groups happen to fill up, then there's 2 other lists that are called not assigned to groups yet. And so if you can't get your name on another list, then put your name there, and I'll work on finding other leaders for anybody else that wants to participate. Please do not add your name at the bottom of the list where there are no lines. If groups get... This would be disobedient if you do this now. If groups get too big, it's hard to have the rapport and the conversations you need. So please don't buck the system for us. So I want to encourage you to do that. Next week, we're going to talk about why this is so important. We're going to talk about what it communicates when we do this, what it means, why it's important to do it. And so I'm excited about that lesson next week. I think it's going to be very meaningful. I hope you'll come back for that. We're going to have a song now, and as we sing this song, if you want to understand what you need to do, if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to do His will, and you need help with that, we'd love to teach you how to do that. In this moment, we'd love to pray with you about how to begin that walk and how to continue that walk if that's your need. So if you have any sort of need, I would like to invite you to come as we stand and sing.
Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are high.